Got all my stuff on silent.
Good morning. This is Karen with newclevelandradio.net and Avoid the Maze, the journey through life. And we're all on it. And you know what? You're not going to be able to avoid the maze, but hopefully you'll learn some tools from today's podcast, things that you might be able to do when you feel stuck or when you feel like that dark cloud is just hanging over your head and you're the only one who is suffering. And I put that in quotes because you know what? It's just part of life. And once we can realize that, we can move forward. Our guest today is Sarah Cart. I met Sarah on podmatch.com, one of my favorite places to go to find people who really care about their journey. So, Sarah, give us a little bit of background.
My husband Ben was diagnosed with an incurable autoimmune disease back in the winter of 2016, 2017. We were told at that time that we would handle it one symptom at a time. And that was, we were on top of that, we thought, until he lost a whole lot of weight the summer of 2017. And the autoimmune progressed from organ to organ and diagnosis to diagnosis, resulting in his needing a pacemaker in September of 2018. And by the spring of 2019, we were told his only chance for survival was if he were to get a heart transplant. So we started running the hurdles to get him on that list. And there are a lot of them. We were not doing well. He was obviously dying, and we came into the winter of 2019, 2020. I think he had 30 doctor's appointments that January, and that pace continued. And on a Friday evening, 2 weeks after the world shut down, a doctor called and said, Ben's kidneys are shutting down. He needs to be in an ER right now. And so I said goodbye to him, and I saw him again 10 weeks later. He managed, was
Unbelievable.
not on the list when he went in the hospital. They put him on the list after he'd been there for a while. They took him off the list because he was unstable. He got back on the list, and they were about to remove him again when a heart became available. On the way into the OR, the surgeon said, the heart is just 50% of the battle. You still have recovery ahead of you. That's the other 50%. And what we didn't know at that moment, and learned a week later, was he had my husband Ben had a fractured left hip. So when he came home to me, my caregiving, which had been a gradual learning curve from the beginning of the autoimmune until he went into the hospital, was suddenly a 0 to 100 miles per hour instantly. He was in a wheelchair. He was dependent on painkillers, and he was going to get a new hip as soon as he was strong enough. He also had a bed sore to beat the band, and he had to adjust from 24/7 doctors and nurses and nutritionists and janitors all cleaning up after him, looking out for him, feeding him 3 hot meals a day, to just having me. So,
You know, as I'm hearing your story, so somebody would sit back and go, well, this is about her husband. Well, as a caregiver, as a spouse, as a family member, as a friend, this is your life. And that's why I find this podcast so important because sometimes we look at those caregivers and say, well, you know, why are you doing it all? You know, get out, go have fun. Great idea, but not necessarily something that's available to you. And
yeah,
through this during the shutdown. So you probably had less help than maybe if it had happened at another time.
yeah. We have 4 sons. They couldn't visit. Yeah, and the caregiving, we were assured as Ben finished his time at the hospital, they sent him into a 2-week rehab program that they send all transplant patients into. And the rehab facility assured me that, don't worry, I know we're asking you to do a lot. You're getting a man in a wheelchair and on opioids, with a heart transplant and all these things, but we will be there for you. There will be home health care people coming in. There will be physical therapists coming in. There will be nurses coming in and changing his dressings every day. But we were living in the Florida Keys, and it was COVID, and getting those people to our house every day turned out to not be the way it worked. It took the physical therapist came, bless his heart. He was the one reliable one right at the beginning, and he came twice, and he said, without further specific instruction, I don't want to damage his broken hip, but he taught us some things about how I could help Ben transfer with less pain, how I was going to be able to get Ben in and out of the shower with that broken hip and onto a shower chair. I mean, he told us things that we needed, which were really helpful. But after that second visit, he said, I'm going to do more damage here than good. So that was that. And the home health aide didn't want to schedule until she knew exactly when the nurse was going to come, because she would come help get Ben in and out of the shower and cleaned up, but she wanted to know that the nurse was going to be there right away afterwards to put the new dressings on. That never happened. So it took about 2 weeks to finally get a nurse who would visit on a regular enough basis that my heart rate went down, and I finally got to count on that. And then when she finally came into our lives, it was only about a week before 4th of July. So she was going off for a 4-day vacation. Bless her heart. She saw my face when she said that, and she said, let me teach you what you need to know to get through those 4 days. And my kids say this can be on my tombstone, but I'm just an English major, but I learned what I needed to know to get through that. All those different medications, different ointments for different wounds, different dressings for different wounds, because it wasn't just the bed sore. He still had where his trach had been. He still had things on his chest where different tubes had gone in and out. He still had points in his groin where different pipes had gone in and out. So I had my hands full.
So this autoimmune disease that they told me had, okay, what led up to that getting defined? Because I have an autoimmune disorder as well, and nothing like what your husband's going through. God bless him. And it took almost 3 years for somebody to tell me that, yes, what you're feeling in your mouth and what you're feeling on your feet is an autoimmune disease, but we don't know a lot about it. And we
Yeah,
don't know how you got it.
we don't know how he got it. We're told it's not genetic. And we were very lucky because I noticed a weird symptom early on and ratted him out to our doctor. His autoimmune is called systemic sclerosis, and sclerosis means hardening. Systemic sclerosis often reveals itself by a hardening of the skin, which is scleroderma. You can also have scleroderma independent of the autoimmune. But Ben's particular autoimmune is typically diagnosed in African American women in their 30s. So Ben's Caucasian, and he was in his mid-50s. It was just weird all the way around. The symptom that gave him away was while we were at a family wedding, and at the end of the ceremony, the pastor had the bride and groom turn, and he introduces them to the congregation, and everyone's applauding and cheering. And what Ben has always done in situations like that, and I just automatically cover my ears because I know he's going to do it, is he whistles. He whistles with one hand. And that day, he used his other hand to do something weird. And I asked in the car on the way home, what's with the two-handed whistle? He didn't do this, which I probably wouldn't have asked about. He didn't use both hands. He used the one hand and squeezed his fingers together. And he said, well, my fingers have been swollen lately. And I asked if, how long? And he said, oh, probably 2 weeks, which probably meant 2 months. And I asked if there was anything else going on, and he did mention that on occasion his fingers would change color. If he changed from air conditioning to outdoors or from cold outdoors to the heat of the house, because we were at that time in the Poconos, and so it might be cooler outdoors than
Right.
indoors in October. He said his fingers would change color, and sometimes his feet would too, white or blue. Um, and so when we went to get our flu shots, I ratted him out to our doctor, and our doctor said, "I'm not giving him his flu shot today. I'm doing blood work." And they found they did a whole series of blood work. It took about 6 weeks to figure it out because the doctor, we were very lucky that he's a really good diagnostician, and he just said these numbers don't make sense, and he kept nudging at it until he finally came up with an answer and said, "I think it's an autoimmune disease. I've now taken you as far as I can. You now need to see a specialist." So within 2 months of that wedding, we were sitting in a rheumatologist's office, which seemed to me like, isn't rheumatology arthritis and joints and things, and not like swollen fingers and circulation? But it turns out that it's all related. So
So was the heart condition contributed to the autoimmune, or was that just something additional that ended up happening?
the autoimmune migrated through Ben's system. So that first summer when he lost all that weight, it was the autoimmune hardening his GI tract so that he couldn't absorb nutrients. It went into his joints, hardened his joints, and so he was very achy. His tendons hurt. He got TMJ at one point. At another point, he had sudden severe hearing loss. It was just the autoimmune working its way through and hardening different parts of his body so that they didn't function properly. And we'd been told early on that if it got to his lungs, that would be bad. And one of the things that they put him on right away, they put him on immunosuppressants, specifically for the scleroderma, and that helped. They also put him on Prozac because one of the side effects of Prozac is it helps your circulation in your fingertips and in your extremities.
Okay.
So we were very lucky that he was on those immunosuppressants, but we then needed to treat, the immunosuppressants didn't necessarily prevent the autoimmune from getting to those other organs. And eventually it got to his heart. So that's
So
what.
he now goes through this heart procedure, and now we also find out, hey, he has a broken hip.
Yeah.
It's COVID. Nobody wants to go into a hospital for anything. So how long did it take before they could do a hip replacement?
The hip replacement was 2 months after he came home to me. It would have been 6 weeks, 5 weeks, but the surgeon got COVID.
Oh,
So that bumped us back. And I don't know. I mean, the surgeon said I could have done it earlier, except that I think the surgeon was a little bit optimistic on how well we had done with the bed sore. And the surgeon was wonderful. He'd started consulting with us as soon as Ben came home from rehab about this is what we're going to have to do. Here are possible options. One, because of COVID, they could have given him some sort of temporary hip replacement that we would then go back in and get replaced 18 months later. Ben was also the surgeon's first heart transplant patient, so he wanted to be really careful about what he did. The chances for infection with any kind of joint replacement where they put in titanium or
right.
whatever else they might make them. The temporary one would have been some sort of concrete. Infection is a real high risk, and for a transplant patient, they didn't want to take that risk. So the surgeon was really good about not just talking with us every week about how's the bed sore coming, but also about the opioids and saying I'm going to have you talk to a pain management specialist right now so that when you do get the hip replaced, you are still able to get some benefit from the pain relievers.
Right.
And he also sent us to a plastic surgeon because the hospital that we were going to, their wound care people were all in their plastic surgery department. And I was like, a plastic surgeon for my husband's rear end seems a little extreme and really luxurious.
Yeah.
But the plastic surgeon was wonderful about, again, educating me on what needed to happen in taking care of that wound as we changed the dressings. So yeah, two months to the hip replacement. And because Ben had been in the hospital for so long, the first time with the 10 weeks, and because he'd done physical therapy in the hospital and at rehab, his hip replacement actually turned out to be outpatient surgery, which was a huge blessing. There was a tropical storm approaching that evening, and the surgeon said, I think you should take him home rather than risk his PTSD at being back in a hospital room. And I did. And the surgeon called us that night to make sure we'd gotten home safely. It was a Friday night. He called me Saturday morning, noontime, and dinner time to see how Ben was doing. And then when he called Sunday morning, and I said, he's doing okay, but he's in such pain. And the surgeon said, this is why we did the pain management. This is when he can take the meds at thus and such a rate, which was huge. We go back to the surgeon 2 weeks later for the follow-up, and the surgeon says to Ben, how are you doing? And Ben says, that first weekend was really hard, but once you told me I could take the meds, it's been great. And the surgeon looked him in the eye and said, that's wonderful. I am not renewing your prescription. And that night, I walked into Ben's room. We had a hospital bed for him, and he was sitting on his bed with his dinner tray, and all of his meds, that particular prescription, were out on the tray, and he was counting how many weeks more of pills he had. And he said, I have about 4 weeks worth of pills, and he was off of them within 10 days. So it
I
was
mean, it sounds like he had such a will as well to get
his,
himself better
yeah, his
because
will for all of this was amazing. The surgeons, the nurses, everybody who met him throughout his autoimmune and who took care of him in the hospital and in rehab remarked on how determined he was to come through all of this. So very lucky.
and you were also very lucky that you had medical teams that
Yeah.
cared enough about you as well. I mean, too often, um, you know, I know when I had my knee surgery 2 days before shutdown,
Ooh,
and I had also had a bar in my other leg for 5 years, and so we knew my recovery was going to be tough. Um, and when they told my husband, "Don't let her go to rehab because there's too much illness. You need to take her home." He he froze. He said, "What am I supposed to do? How do I help get her up the steps?" And they said, "Oh no, she's got to walk up and down the steps." And he goes, "But we only have one railing." He said, "Figure it out." So in his case, it was like, we're not going to tell you anything. You just sort of figure this out. And getting in and out of a regular bed
yeah.
is
All
almost
the transferring stuff.
impossible. But,
Yeah.
we did it, but we had to figure it out on our own. And I am so grateful to know that our people out there, medical people, who, especially during a most strenuous time, they were
Yeah.
there at least teaching you the things that you needed to know. Because I'm sure as a wife, you didn't want to move him wrong and then have him break another bone.
Well, I felt I had the responsibility of the world on my shoulders. I mean,
Sure.
all these people had put their efforts into saving his life, and now they sent him home to me, and I had to keep him alive. That was overwhelming. But one of the things that had happened in the hospital as he got sicker was he lost all manual dexterity. So I am just so grateful to the nurses who facilitated FaceTimes for us, especially when, as he, after the heart transplant, there were times that he didn't know who I was. Actually, before and after, there were times he didn't know who I was. And the nurses were so supportive and encouraging of me, of telling me, hang in, this is what happens. It will get better. Today may be the worst day of your life, but I promise you it will get better. Or at one point in the hospital, Ben he was now post-transplant, beginning to feel better, getting really, really antsy, wanting to get out of the surgical ICU. And the nurse said to me privately, do not push for that. While he's in the surgical ICU, he is getting the undivided attention of everybody. Once he's in intermediate care, he's going to be really upset. And she wasn't kidding. He called me. This is partly the meds. He called me to say, the service here is awful. The food is awful. I'm like, it's not a hotel.
Yeah.
It's a hospital. It's not supposed to be a 5-star experience. Um, just so that the medical personnel, we were really, despite it's being COVID, we were so very blessed and lucky on that score. And we were not the only people going through a whole lot of crap at that point. I mean, when he was first in the hospital, he was dying, and I was begging for a compassionate visit. I wanted to get in to tell him I loved him and to thank him for our time together and all that he taught me. And that wasn't going to happen. And I'd read the stories about all the other people who were going through that exact same thing. It's just a heartbreak all the way around.
So how did we know how he survived what he was going through. He had the medical care. But how is it for you day after day being at home, knowing you can't get in to see him? You're relying on what the nurses are telling you. But, are they telling that to make you feel better, or are they telling you the truth?
I had one secret weapon, which is a very good friend who, we were in Florida, but a good friend who's a doctor in Connecticut who has done hundreds of heart transplants. And so I could call him and say, what does this mean? I didn't always have enough information for him because the doctors in Florida wouldn't give me enough information to share, but I had enough that he could talk me off the ledge a few times. But he wasn't always available because he had a job. Things that I do when I'm in crisis, one is journaling. Another, I have to be in true crisis for this. I have to admit, I have not done it in a couple of years, but another is meditating. People who know me are like, wow, you meditated? There must have been nothing else that you could have done at that time. It's like, yes, I knew that I sat still for 20 minutes and just pondered the concept of hope or whatever it was that particular day. That was really helpful. And I think in some ways, this might sound a little weird. It helped me connect to the universe and a higher power, and gave me faith that there is a higher power out there. There's a lot we don't know. There are a lot of mysteries, a lot of answers that will elude us during our time in this dimension, but that supported me through that. I would focus. I would ask the universe to focus light and love on where Ben was and on his doctors. And I think it helped me to do that. I have no idea whether it really helped Ben.
Well, and that's what it's all about, because you were doing that self-care that you needed to do. Because if you didn't take care of yourself, you weren't going to be able to take care of Ben, whether it was through a phone call or have him by your side. And that's what a lot of us don't understand. We start forgetting ourselves. And it's like, all I can do is think about him. Well, that's agitating you. Your heart rate is going up, and God knows what else is going on. So I see a book behind you, and I'm reading it way back to you. What is the book about?
On My Way Back to You is the story of Ben's and my journey. I wrote it as a way to process everything that we went through. The title is from when one of us is out doing errands and the other texts and says, hey, have you been to the grocery store yet? We need graham crackers. Or if you're not on your way home yet, could you stop at the post office and get stamps? And the shorthand for your timing is wrong. Is I'm on my way back to you, or actually just abbreviated, and my phone recognizes it. It's OMW. My phone fills in the rest. I think it's BTU. So as Ben was leaving, with his failed kidneys on his way to the hospital, to the ER, he said, this is the last thing he said to me was, I'm going to go get this fixed and then I'll be on my way back to you. So that's where it comes from.
I love that.
And what I needed to process was, I mean, a whole bunch of stuff. I was his caregiver and I missed that he had a broken hip. How did that happen? I'm someone who likes to know where I'm supposed to be at 10 a.m. on Tuesday, 5 months from now. So for me to miss something that basic, what did we do? And it was that he was so sleep deprived as he was getting sicker, as he was dying, that he'd literally fallen asleep on his way back from the bathroom to the couch where he was sleeping because he was so restless he was falling out of bed. So he was sleeping on the couch so he would have less space to fall and wouldn't break something.
Right.
Well, who knows?
Yeah.
I'm sleeping in our bedroom and I never heard this. So a few days after that fall in the middle of the night, the only way I learned anything about it was he was taking ibuprofen like they were jelly beans. And I said, what's going on? I fell. What'd you do? Well, I fell asleep on my way back from the toilet to the couch. I'm like, that's 15 feet. Yeah, I know. Isn't that amazing? I went over like a tree. Did you hit anything? I don't think so, but I bruised my hip. That's what we thought. That conversation was 3 days before he went in the hospital. So I missed his broken hip. And had we been aware of his broken hip, he probably never would have gotten on the transplant list. His autoimmune issue probably would have kept him off the transplant list, but he was in the hospital. And the only people who were being taken into the OR at that point were, and we forget this, at that point of the pandemic, if you thought you were sick, you drove in your car to a parking lot, you sat in line for who knows how long, you let someone stick a cotton swab up your nose and scratch your brain, and then you waited 3 or 4 days to get the results.
Right.
The only people who were going into the OR, at least in the hospital where Ben was, were gunshot wounds, car accidents, or patients who were dying when an organ became available. So he was literally in the right place at the right time during a really wretched time for all the rest of us. So I needed to process how all those things fell together to our benefit. And I needed to process that a family in what has to have been their darkest moments turned their tragedy into a miracle for us. And the gratitude we have for that family making that really wretched decision is overwhelming.
And it has to also be overwhelming that you know how ill he is. And you want him to recover, come back to you, and be the Ben that he was, because that's what we all say when somebody gets ill and then they're in recovery. It's like, you're going to be the same person, right? But he too went through so much physically and emotionally. He's not going to come back exactly the same way he was. So how did that work for the two of you?
We both had a lot of adjusting to do. His PTSD would be triggered by our visits to the hospital, and after a transplant, there are routine and regular visits. My PTSD would be triggered by the hold music that the hospital had used, and I wasn't calling the hospital and being put on hold there, but there are many other doctor's offices or even beauty parlor. If I get put on hold, sometimes they have that same hold music, and that can trigger me. He developed vertigo in 6 months, 8 months after he came home, and that freaked us out because we didn't know what it was. Suddenly he's dizzy, can't really stand up, thinks he's going to be ill. And is this rejection? What do we, the panic that went with that. We got really good at always having a go bag of hand sanitizer and gloves because it was COVID, but also his hearing aid charger and a Sharpie marker. If he was going to be admitted to the hospital, a Sharpie marker is a really great thing to have in your go bag, and you can write your name on all sorts of stuff. His the charger for his phone, an extension cord, very useful if you're going to be in hospital
Yeah.
anymore with all the things we need to charge, all of our electric gadgets. Um, so we just took it one step at a time. One thing that we did learn as he learned to walk again after the hip replacement and worked his way from the wheelchair to a walker and then to a cane, and then learning his way how to go up the stairs, as you know from your knee. He came home from PT one day and said, look at me, I can do the stairs. And it was the ones up with the good, follow with the bad,
Yeah.
up with the good. And the following week, when he came home, he said, I need to show you what I did in physical therapy today. This is called reciprocal steps. And it was left foot, right foot, left foot, right foot. And we both got laughing at how such something that seems so simple was such a major milestone for us. Fast forward to we're settling back into how things might be, get a little snippy with each other about something stupid. And he stopped in the middle of a heated conversation and he walked over to the stairs and he said, look at me doing reciprocal steps. And he did. He only had to go up about 3 steps before I said, you're right. That's what's important. It just puts everything in perspective. So we both learned a little bit about what's important and how to back down from what's really not.
And once you get back to that so-called normal, new normal,
Yeah.
whatever you want to call it, you have to expect you are going to still have those snippy moments. It's normal. This morning, it's funny, my husband works an hour from home. So typically he has to be out of the door by 7 a.m. This morning, he didn't come downstairs for breakfast until 7 a.m.
Oh,
And it triggered me because I get up with him. I make sure that he's set to go. And I started like arguing with him. And he looked at me and he goes, I know you're right, but you know what? Isn't there something more important today? And so I thought he meant, oh, like, what is today? Like, what did I forget? And I said, like, what? And his comment was, I'm healthy and I'm going to work. And it just came out of his mouth like that. It was like, oh, okay. So
yeah.
you're going to be late to work. I'm not going to be late to work. But that is okay. You got to have those moments because everything can't be rainbows and lollipops.
Yeah. Yeah. The triggers for me are when I find I do his pillboxes because his manual dexterity's it was never great. His handwriting always looked like he should be a doctor. I wish his career had paid him like he'd been one. But so I'm the one who does his pillbox, and it'll be time to do it again. And there are last Thursday's evening pills. Like I spend the time doing this. I renew your prescriptions and refill them and all the rest. And you mistake it. What are you doing? And he'll, it's the same thing as your husband. Just
Yeah.
say, hey, I'm here.
Yeah.
I'm here to annoy you. Give thanks for that,
Yeah, exactly. You brought up a subject that a lot of people probably aren't going to understand. When we hear the word PTSD, we think of the military.
Yeah.
Okay. We think of somebody maybe who's been abused. But PTSD is so much more than that. It's like you said, you went through so much and now there are certain things that remind you of what you went through. And yes, in your good time, you can sit back and go, I understand all that. I'm okay. But when it happens unexpectedly, listening to the same music that you had to listen to back when he was in ICU, and now you're just hearing it because you're calling the gas company to pay your bill.
Right. Right. Yeah, it's and it can happen. It tends to happen more if I'm sleep deprived or I'm stressed about something else. I might not even realize I'm stressed about something else, but it layers on. Um, yeah, I don't mean to take anything away from the military veterans who have major issues with it, but as a caregiver, you also have major issues with it. I mean, you struggled to keep somebody alive. That is a level of stress that most people don't, hopefully, don't have to experience. Although First Lady Rosalind Carter did have a quote about there are four kinds of people. There are, and they are those who have been caregivers, those who are caregivers, those who will be caregivers, or those who will need caregivers. It is a part of our lifestyle, our society, and we tend to pretend it's like the man behind the curtain. Pay no attention to that man behind the curtain. And it's a very real thing. And you learn all kinds of things in this process. I have since learned that there's a statistic, something like 50% of caregivers predecease their patient. And if they're over 70 years old, 70% of them predecease their patient. And when that statistics was first said to me, I pushed back and said, oh, no, wait, no, that can't be right. And then I stopped and went, well, okay, Ben's father predeceased Ben's mother. He was her caregiver. My father predeceased my stepmother. He was her caregiver. So yeah, okay, I get it. It's a very real stress there.
Well, and we aren't taught really how to be caregivers. Even women who have cared for their children, care for their husbands, it's totally different when you're in that situation, actually caring for a person who is ill or in the process of dying. When my mother had a stroke, it'll be 8 years this week.
Oh,
And when we got the phone call, um, we were told that she appeared to have lost her sight, but she did not recognize that she had lost her sight. So they took her into the hospital. Now she was 96 and a half years old. So part of me, as I'm driving from Ohio to Michigan, I'm saying she's lived a long life. She really hasn't gone through dementia. I am so lucky. On the other hand, it's like, oh my God, this is my mother. Is she going to be alive when I finally get there? Um,
yes.
and when we found out that there was no real way that we could treat her, because if she didn't think she was blind, how do you treat her to understand that she's blind? And so the doctors told us, you're not going to tell her. It will upset her. It probably will, give her another stroke. And so I chose, knowing that it was going to be a short time, I moved in with her. I had no idea what it meant to be a caregiver. Um, and the first time one of her caregivers was there and asked me to help turn her, it was like, but that's too intimate. That was my first thought. But then
Yeah.
it was like, I can't think about that. I
Hmm.
have to do it. And the more I did, the more, I started understanding that number one, I'm really not a good caregiver. Um, I can give you love, I can hold your hand, but I know what my limitations are. But if I was thrown into it like you were, I think I would have done exactly what you've done, because when you love somebody, you don't walk away.
Right. Right. Yeah. I mean, you get asked to do something and you're 10% of the way into it before you realize, oh, wow, this is going to mean I have to, like you said, too
Yep.
intimate.
Yep.
Yeah. It's, you never imagine. And we don't talk about it.
Right.
So, yeah.
So how is Ben doing today? This is at least 4 years.
4 years. We celebrated his fourth birthday in April. He is doing really, really well. He is back to the ever ready bunny, the Tigger from Winnie the Pooh. He's got a hitch in his step, and on a regular basis, he annoys the living daylights out of me, and it is usually wonderful.
Yep. I totally, and now the boys can come home and see dad because it's
Yes.
safer.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. It's been amazing. Our boys. My stepmother had an expression, it kind of annoyed me. She used to always just say, keep having fun. And it's like, really? Can you stop with that? And now it's like, while you can, keep having fun. Go do it. And our boys are wonderful about encouraging us to do that. We have 4 grandchildren. They are similarly programmed to help remind us to keep having fun. We have this second chance, and we're trying to make the most of it.
I love it. So where can we find your book?
It's available on Amazon, or your local bookseller can order it for you. There is a website, www.onmywaybacktoyou.com, and that will steer you in the right direction.
Well, we'll put all that in the show notes. And I want to thank you so much for joining me today and give Ben a big hug. I feel like I really know him.
Well, Karen,
And
thank you.
and to all of you listening out there, Sarah didn't come on to moan and groan about what she went through. What she came on to do is share that this is part of her journey. And she did what she needed to do, did what she wanted to do. And she's glad that she did so that he can annoy her and they can have fun. I love it.
That's right. That's right.
Have a great day. Thank you, Sarah.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you, Karen, very much.
Bye.
Bye.